But the thing is that we might come at the conclusion from different different ideas, but the conclusion's the same, right? There was an interesting piece, and understandably, I haven't read many of the hot takes in the past 24 hours, but one of them was an electoral analyst for the Australian Financial Review who said that actually the Liberal Party, one of the constituencies that actually lifted its voting was in welfare-dependent communities. So you had a scenario where, obviously, there was a breakup with the big end of town, but there was, in some parts of Australia, a movement back towards inroads being made from the Liberals there. But before we get again to the philosophical stuff, and look, it's not that it's not important, but it is, we are doing a television show, and endless conversations about, conservative philosophy may well be a little bit sleepy, even on a Sunday night, okay? But I do want to talk about candidate selection, because, Linda, I know I'm going to embarrass you, but you are very good at this. And the Labor Party is very good at this, about identifying somebody and having a system to put them through. You had some big wins out as a result of that last night, didn't you?
Well, look, there were mayors running for Labor, and those who did run for Labor did extremely well. So it is the case, of course, that over in Western Australia, Tracy, the Mayor of Wanneroo, has had an extraordinary swing to her, and she'll now be the new MP for Pearce. We were running Jerome Laxale in Bennelong, and that looks tight, but he may well fall over the line. Again, a 6.9% swing, quite extraordinary. And of course, Matt Burnett up in Gladstone, my very good friend, who, even though he may not win that seat, it's clear he had an extraordinary swing to him. But I don't want to pull out that this is on one side of politics. In the South Australian election recently, we saw Sam Telfer elected to the Liberal government there, the Liberal opposition. We've seen, I think, a lot of high-profile local candidates, and Di Lee is another one. She's former member of the Liberal Party, now an independent, who have been elected on the basis of being a strong local voice. And you could almost have the same slogan for all of them. They're people who know their community. Paulie, I would argue they're at the highest level of government in local government, of course, and then they're making a decision to, go to another level of government, less local, disappointing. But nevertheless, I think that candidate selection in this election was incredibly important, and the concept of selecting candidates early, selecting them in a way that was democratic and they had the support of their local people, clearly was critically important.
But also, Bronwyn, the thing is that, look, we're not going to muck around with it. The Liberal Party absolutely screwed it, particularly in New South Wales. And in part the way they screwed it was because the right was fighting with the left, and every time the right screwed the left screwed the right backwards. Some bloke goes to court. This could have been solved 12 months ago, but it was intentionally being disrupted. And believe me, while we talk tonight, tomorrow I start talking about the New South Wales government. Matt Keane, get ready for your own graphic. You're getting the marshmallow treatment. All right, so what about that, about who we pick to run for Parliament?
Well, when I was president of the party, I actually was one who really supported running candidates for local government. Traditionally, the Liberal Party didn't do it. We used to have Liberal independents. But it made sense to me that we would take part in local government. It's still argued about in the Liberal Party. But nonetheless, choosing people with a high profile, people who stand for something, people who are involved in the community, or someone to whom they feel drawn. If someone's going to come in. When I was pre-selected, I actually lived in the adjoining electorate of Warringah, but I simply said I wanted to move up the road. And I had a lot of connections, and that was successful. And I did involve myself very much in the community. So that's spot on. You have to do it. All politics is local was the great catch cry of a former Speaker of the United States Senate. But there's something else I think that's very important. We also said all along that McGowan was going to run the campaign in Western Australia. He won those 4 seats. And the fact of the matter is that the wipeout in Western Australia in the state election, where they were left with 2 members, was all because they too said, we'll go green and we'll go for climate change. wipeout.
Yeah.
So you just can't do it. You can't be a pale imitation of your opponent and expect your opponent not to win.
Okay, but here's the thing. This is the preview of the climate conversation, right? But I want to talk about Albo as PM, all the rest of it. Andrew, here's the thing. I understand, and I am not advocating that the party becomes more lefty, all the rest of it, right? But here's the deal. The Liberal Party lost 0 seats yesterday to anyone who was saying dump net zero. They lost 5 to people who want 60% action on climate change by 2030.
Correct.
How do you square that circle?
Well, also I point out that the Nationals, which has been the most recalcitrant party when it comes to global warming, didn't lose any seats. The
Absolutely.
Liberals lost a poultice.
Yeah, fair point.
But obviously they represent different constituencies. But the thing here is, you know, a lot of Liberals will be saying, and this is not just the global warming issue. It goes to other issues too, whether it's you know, that we're not taking the women's problem serious and all that kind of stuff. And the problem with the Liberals is they didn't have the courage to put their arguments. Now, on global warming, Matt Canavan does, but the Liberals don't.
Correct.
And if you do that, you cannot win an argument if you haven't put it in the first place. And the Liberals just think, well, look, we'll go, you know, I'm their leader and I must follow them. I mean, you can't set the terms of the agenda that way. And the problem with global warming is this. When you do what the Liberals have done, first under Turnbull and now under Morrison, is when you say, oh, well, look, maybe we should, you know, global warming is actually a big problem after all. It is really dangerous and we should, after all, commit to net zero. What you're in fact saying is, we were wrong. We were wrong about something that we now accept could wipe out your kids, but we now see the light and we will do what Labor says, but we won't do it as fast as Labor. I mean, how does it work? You've in fact legitimised all the criticisms of the Teal independents, of Labor, of the Greens, but you've said, even though I now see the problem, even though I've been wrong all that time, I'm not going to do what they're going to do to save you. And I don't know how the Liberals thought they could get away with a message like that.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and I'm going to be playing sort of devil's advocate as much in this conversation as anything, right? But Corey, again,
Paul.
No, but hang on.
Okay.
But Corey, again, right? So times change, things move on. Now, I can't stand the idea that the big end of town has decided to go in this direction, but if that's where capital is, that's where every state government is, how do you fight against it? I'm not arguing I'm saying, how do you fight against it here, Corey?
Okay. Well, you know what? You've actually got to make the position, as Andrew mentioned. You've got to have the courage of your conviction to argue it. How did the Liberal Party continue to win those seats for the last decade during these climate wars? The problem is we've got people who have capitulated in all this space. And we could go not just in global warming space, but Andrew's exactly right. They've admitted that basically they have been wrong for all this time, and you know when you try and appease a lefty, the only thing they do is move the front line somewhere else a bit further, and they try and slice a bit more. You can never, ever appease them. And that's why I was incredulous, for example, when the Prime Minister decided to give extra money to the ABC. Was that what, to try and buy some favourable balanced coverage during the election campaign? Because it certainly didn't come. But why didn't the Liberals, for example, halve the budget of the ABC? Why didn't they do the things, embrace nuclear power when they reviewed the EPBC Act? They've been too timid, too cowardly. They've been frozen in the headlights. And I just look back on this last 3 years, and unfortunately, I think it's been actually a wasted 3 years because there was no vision. And if you ask me what the campaign was about, until the last week of the campaign, I didn't know what a Liberal Party policy was, to be honest. The superannuation policy, gave them a boost, it gave them a buoyance, and they did it in the housing superannuation because it reflected true Liberal principles. Every other day of the campaign was a bauble for you, a trinket for you, a handout for you. And you know what? None of it said to me they would know what an agenda is for the next 100 days or the first 100 days of the next term or for the hope and prosperity of this country going forward. That, I think, was the terrible mistake.
So we're going to get to what a Labor
I
government...
don't think we should overlook something else, though. I don't think we should overlook something else, though, Paul. It's sort of an elephant in the room. Let's face facts. A lot of people just didn't like Scott Morrison. And a lot of those people were Liberals as well. And it's been a problem with this presentation for a long time. You know, this idea, you know how he talks very fast and doesn't take a breath so you can't be interrupted. It's like a guy that was always scared of being interrupted because he wasn't quite confident in what he was saying. That's one of the reasons, the bulldozer thing came out. They didn't like him. Now, I thought a lot of the knock against him was actually fraudulent, like he doesn't like women or something like that. I thought it was a complete beat-up. It was a stitch-up. It was a hate session. But the fact is, a lot of people just didn't like Scott Morrison, which is why I suggested in February, a bit too late because, things were as they were, that Scott Morrison should make way for Peter Dutton. That might have probably made it worse in the short term, but they weren't going to vote for Scott Morrison. Full stop.
Well, but they didn't want to vote.
That's the way it was.
They didn't want to vote for Albanese either. That was quite clear, and that's why they voted all over the shop.
But Albanese is Prime Minister and Scott Morrison is not. Slight difference.
Which brings about a good discussion about why do we have compulsory preferential voting anymore? Why do we have people being elected when they get less votes than somebody who is defeated? So I have to be honest.
Well, and it works both ways, and you're not going to change it, Bronwyn.
Well, I'm
sorry. You're not going to change it. Just look.
It was a miracle 3 years ago.
You've got to win by these rules.
I'm sorry. No, that's not right. In New South Wales, there is optional preferential voting. In the Senate, there is optional preferential voting. There is no reason whatsoever why we can't have optional preferential voting federally. And I've got to be honest, when I was Shadow Special Minister of State, I proposed it. I went around the states and discussed it, and it was knocked on the head for a reason I could never quite understand.
How's that going to sound? You think we lost this, the Liberals lost this election, so how about we now propose a rule that'll make it easier for us to win next time? Look, you might be right. You might have right on your side. But I tell you what, it's something to get the Liberals out of this.
I guess the point I'm making more is that you have to have considered plans about how you do things. If we'd done it when I wanted to do it, it would have been okay to do. So there are going to be a lot of things that you've got to plan to introduce gradually along the chain. But don't knock them out because you think somebody might argue against it. If it's the right thing to do, and there are a big case you could make out for why it's right, don't knock it on the head and say we can't do it.
All right, now, we're going to talk about...
I'll just tell you that people are going to say you're trying to rig the rules to stay in power.
I'm not saying do it tomorrow, Andrew. No, I'm not saying tomorrow.
I'm not telling you what I think. Well, it doesn't matter. We're raising it now. You want to raise this agenda. I'm just telling you how the Greens and the Teals and all that will interpret it, and they'll have a point. And I think what they really need to do is Liberals, what the hell do you stand for? You talk about
I agree with
let's get mayors and former mayors and all that. All this is good. All this is good. But the problem is when you've got power, what do you want to do with it?
Oh, absolutely.
And a collection of mayors, no matter how good they are, might not actually know what to do with the power.
Yeah, but you know I'm not pretending
a lot
that
of
that's
people
not
look
the
at the
case.
Morrison government. A lot of people look at the Morrison government's time in office and will think, hey, that was just like the Fraser years. Wasted. What did you do with it? You had the power. You didn't reform the ABC. You didn't fight for your values. You didn't advance individual freedom. You didn't advance free speech. You didn't. You made government bigger, not smaller. I mean, what did you actually do with the power?
All right, I'm going to take a